This is the 2019 BMW R1250 GS HP Edition, and I'm about to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is the greatest motorcycle ever made. Now, before you can fully understand this machine, you have to understand the history of it. And like most cool things, it's got a pretty unique history. Between 1978 and 1980, some engineers and mechanics who worked for BMW Motorrad, Motorrad being German for motorcycle, secretly, without telling their bosses, produced a prototype of an off-road motorcycle that could also be registered on the street. And this bike just so happened to have attracted the attention of some of the top riders at this 6-day enduro race. This convinced the bosses at BMW to greenlight the project, and within 21 months, the R80 GS was introduced. Now, the R in the name is what BMW uses for their opposing cylinder boxer engines. And the GS stands for Gelände Sport, which I'm sure I said that wrong, and that's German for off-road. But since the 1980s, these bikes have continued to get bigger, badder, meaner, faster, stronger, and completely more capable. And in the past 2 decades, it went from being a 1150 to 1200 to now what you see right here, a 1250. Now, for the longest time, I've had the idea that enduro bikes kinda suck. What makes them good off-road is what makes them bad on-road, and what makes them good on-road is what makes them bad off-road. And generally, that makes a lot of sense, until I learned this little piece of information, which I'm gonna show you guys on this little chart. Here is the off-road capabilities of the best off-road bike, let's say a dirt bike. Here is the on-road capabilities of, let's say, the best street bike. And then here is where the BMW GS falls into place between those two categories. And you look at it and you're like, well, Sean, you were right. It does just kind of suck at everything. Well, there's another point on this chart that we did not put on there. That is your capabilities. Here's the average person's capabilities for both on-road and off-road. Here's your capabilities, and chances are here's the best guy that you know's capabilities. So when you look at it that way, these things are actually pretty awesome. And it is on-road and off-road extremely well, and it's got some features that actually kind of makes you a better rider and a safer rider. And that all brings us to this, the 19 BMW R1250 GS HP Edition. It's not just any motorcycle, it's actually my motorcycle. I fell in love with these bikes. And it's a true undeniable fact that the HP Edition, which wears the BMW M Performance colors, is the prettiest color combo on the planet. And that's pretty much all the HP Edition really is, just a color package, which if you think is worth the extra $575, which I do, then maybe it is worth that much. Now in a little bit, I'm going to show you guys how this thing dominates the street and conquers the trails, but let me show you some of the cool tech that's on this thing. But first, I have to admit something to you guys. And I'm kind of embarrassed about it. You know what? Actually, I'm not embarrassed about it. I dropped this bike 3 times the first day I got it. That's kind of the best thing about it. 1, depending on what you're doing with the bike, you're gonna drop it. Like, that's just a fact. But 2, this bike is made to drop. And that's something that the other manufacturers really, I don't think they ever really got. And I've dropped other bikes. I've dropped other adventure bikes. I've dropped, even most recently, I dropped the new V-Strom DL1000, and I dropped it in the grass. And with that one fall, I caused about $600 worth of damage. One of the features of these bikes is the big giant opposing cylinders, that when it falls over, it doesn't fall over that much, but also everything else is protected. And if you put a crash bar up here, which I'm gonna do, the whole bike is protected. And that's because BMW knows who's buying these bikes. They know what you're doing with these bikes, and they know how you're gonna do with these bikes. I mean, it's an adventure bike. It's gonna get dropped. And this is the flagship adventure bike. This is the adventure bike that all the other adventure bikes are trying to knock off the mountain. So it's gonna have some pretty cool features to it. Now, one of the obvious features is the classic single-sided swing arm, which makes it significantly easier to replace the tire or fix the tire if you're on the trail. You just lean the bike over, lift it up, pop it off. Another obvious feature is the bike's ergonomics, where sitting down, it's one of the most comfortable, perfect riding positions I've ever been on. But also, it feels just as good standing up, which if you're off-road, this is most of what you're doing. It also has a port for your heated gear, heated grips with 3 different heat settings that warm up super fast, adjustable seat height from taking the seat off and then just flipping this thing up or down, an adjustable windshield that you can control right here on the fly, And of course it's got cruise control, and it has hill start control. So if you're on a real steep hill, it'll stop you from rolling back, which I have not figured out how to use yet. Now this bike has a lot of cool tech features, and we can talk about them for a long time. But let's talk about the life-saving, fun-saving aspects of this bike, like the big important stuff. So for this bike to be really good on-road and off-road, some key features need to be able to change. And that's why it has multiple different driving modes. And the driving modes have some room to actually be customized themselves. Now, despite what you may think, these modes are extremely necessary. And let me explain to you why the tech tames this motorcycle for the average person to be able to actually ride it. Now, you might be thinking, this bike's not that powerful. And maybe your 600 Super Sport could probably take it. Well, to be honest with you, I'm not so sure. Because I would rather put a new rider on a 600 Super Sport than this bike without any traction control or wheelie control. And it's because of the way the engine delivers the power. A 600 Super Sport makes around 100 horsepower and weighs around 430 pounds. This bike makes around 140 horsepower and weighs around 500 pounds. But the 600 Super Sport only makes around 50 foot-pounds of torque, while this thing makes over 100. And the torque on this bike is almost instantaneous, which is awesome for when you're cruising on the highway going 60 and you want to pass somebody and not drop as many gears. But if you were a new rider and this thing had no driver's aids and you had a pretty sloppy throttle hand, this thing could stand straight up in an instant, and this could get you in a lot of trouble really, really, really quick. It's the same exact problem that car companies are having when they make a 1,000 horsepower vehicle that can be driven by the average person at slow speeds without being completely uncontrollable. They have to limit the power somewhere. At the top speed, they give you full power, and when it has traction, they give you full power. But until then, it's got to hold you back. Now, I had the opportunity to go to the BMW Performance Driving School in South Carolina, and if this is not on your bucket list, I suggest you put it on there because it was next level. And I learned something very interesting about these BMW bikes. Now, almost all modern BMW bikes have this same feature. It's called ABS Pro. And what ABS Pro does is it knows how lean you are and is able to regulate the braking. Let me show you what I mean. So we got on the track with many different types of bikes, including the GS. And the track was wet. And the instructor told us to hit this corner at 50 miles an hour and then to slam on the front brake. And the bike will stand itself up and then come to a stop while staying in your own lane. Now, if you've been riding motorcycles for any amount of time, you know that when it's wet and you're in a corner and you slam on your front brakes, you know exactly what's gonna happen. That bike's gonna low side as fast as possible and you're gonna be eating dirt. And that's when I realized that the systems that they're putting on this motorcycle are really life-saving systems. And while we're at the BMW facility, here's a demonstration of some of the cool stuff that these motorcycles are capable of. Oh! Alright, so before we take this thing for a spin, let me fill you in on some of the specs of this bike. The powertrain is a beastly 1254 cc's horizontally opposed twin-cylinder engine that makes 136 horsepower and 105 foot-pounds of torque, and is both liquid and air-cooled. The power gets sent through the 6-speed transmission, through the sealed drive shaft system, and then uses these 170/60 17-inch tires to put the power to the ground. And it weighs in at just 550 pounds, which is almost 300 pounds lighter than a Harley-Davidson Road King. Let's fire this thing up and take it for a spin and see if we can beat the 3.4 0 to 60 time that this thing claims. I think it's faster than that though. Let's go find out. All right guys, before we take this thing for a test drive, let's hear a word from our sponsor, Jesus Christ. Hebrew 10:25-24, and let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and do good deeds, not forsaking our own assembly together, as it is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the days drawing near. Amen. Let's throw on the gloves, scratch my neck. All right, so this is how you start the bike. Clutch, press the power button, I fired up. Now, one of the first things you notice when you jump on this bike is how light the clutch is. And I actually went to the BMW school. We drove these exact bikes. We did a 2-day class. It was next level. I would recommend it. We might even show some footage of that. But something that a lot of the new riders thought, okay, I'm a new rider. I'm gonna do a 850 or a smaller bike. By the end of the class, they all realized, they all ended up on 1250s but they all realized that the 1250 was easier to ride even though it's a bigger bike. And one of the reasons for that is how smooth or how light the clutch is. And it really is one of those bikes that once you learn how to ride, it's limitless of where you can go with this thing and what you can do. Let's just, I got so much to say. I love this bike. Now, the bike is incredibly fast. I actually didn't realize how fast it was until I took it off of road mode and put it on, what mode did I have it on before? I had it on Dynamic Pro, and Dynamic Pro is nuts. It's like the track mode where there's almost no aids in here. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm almost embarrassed about this. I'm cruising, I'm going like 25 in my neighborhood. I'm like, let me pop a wheelie a little bit. Our first gear RPMs are low, I cracked the throttle, bam, I'm 12 o'clock. I almost lost it. I saved it though. And then same thing in second gear. This thing has an incredible amount of power, and all that torque is almost instant right down low, which you don't notice. You don't notice when you're off-road. You don't notice when you're, you know, when it's on road mode or rain mode. But this bike does a great job at harnessing the energy and the power that it has. It really is incredible. So this is the adventure riding ergonomics, and in my opinion, this is the most comfortable motorcycle out there. Just the adventure bikes. Your knees are in front of your feet, your hands are in front of you. It's like how you would normally, it's like sitting on a stool. It's very comfortable, and you can do it for a long time. You also have the ability, which most bikes you can't do this, because the handlebars are so high up, is you can just stand up and continue riding like that. Really stretch out your legs and continue moving. They make it like that because when you're riding off-road, sometimes you need to stand up. A lot of times you need to stand up. In a little bit, we'll go do the real life 0 to 60, and this thing's gonna impress you. Let me just tell you that. Something I learned when I was at the, you know, from owning a couple of these. This one's mine. This is my baby. But from owning a couple of these, and also going to the school. What happens if your key fob battery dies? It's a proximity key. So as long as the key's in your pocket, your bike's gonna fire up. What happens if that battery dies? Well, there's a little antenna on the back of the tail underneath. It's a little pokey thing. If your key battery dies, you take your key. Let's say you're out in the sticks, you're out in the woods. You got to get your bike running. You got to get home. You take your key, you touch it up to that thing, and then press the power button. Bam, you're back up and rolling. So they have it built in. Unlike I think Harley Davidson and I think Honda, where you actually need to have a code. You need to know a code. No one's gonna memorize any code to fire. You're gonna lose it if you don't use it all the time. Let's try to jump this railroad tracks. All that you can see, everything you can see, all these fields, all these hills, all this stuff, that river, this bike could go through it. And I really want to, but I don't think I'm allowed to. I could go through that field. There's nothing going on in that field. So big. So not only do these bikes handle incredibly well, but they do so many things incredibly well. If you're a street bike guy and you want to hit it hard on the street, you could totally do it on this bike. And in many cases, for most people, this bike is more than what you could actually do. All right, so something that they added new to this machine was the Dynamic Pro, no, Enduro Pro mode, which Enduro Pro is the ability, that's what you put it on when you're going off-road. So you're going off-road, that lets you cut your back end out a little bit. It limits the traction control, takes it off a little bit. What it also does is it lets you lock up your rear tire. And what they realized was that when you're off-road, the fastest way to stop is for you to be able to lock up your rear tire. Lock that up and let some dirt kind of pile up in front of it. That way it kind of digs in. And then it uses a special combination of the front ABS. Taking this thing off-road where it belongs, we realized that the front ABS system is like next level. From my limited experience of dirt bike riding, it was almost, most of what you're doing is all rear brake. Because you never want to be in that situation where your front wheel slides out. I learned that with this very sophisticated ABS system, you're still using almost all front brake. And I'm talking, it was wet, it was rainy,
We were going downhill, we were on mud, we were on grass, and we were only using front brake. It was really nuts. Let's do 0 to 60 real quick. Go. Go. Oh, missed it. Alright, that was a horrible 0 to 60. Like, I messed up on like multiple accounts, but it was still incredibly fast. I'm actually surprised it didn't hit 60 in first gear. You have to actually shift. So I hit the rev limit for a moment. Now you can imagine when it comes to a highway cruiser, it's really hard to beat this machine. Rumor has it, in some nice summer nights, if you happen to be racing an AMG E55 at night, this thing will easily get you up to about 135 and will pull away from that Mercedes-Benz. That's just the rumors that I've heard. Watch this, 6th gear, just roll onto it, and this thing just goes. I mean, torque for days. But another thing I'm looking at when I'm riding these bikes and I'm on the road, I'm just looking at, I don't know why my mind thinks this way. What if we get a traffic jam and we're stuck here for hours? You are never in a traffic jam when you're riding a BMW R1250 GS. It doesn't exist. There's no limits to where you can go. You could drive over cars. You could drive over that medium. There's always some spot that you can go through grass and jump a fence. I could smoke this guy if I wanted to. He's got a cool bike though. It's a nice looking F4i. If there was one motorcycle that I had to have for the rest of my life and I had to ride it all year round, only one, there's no competition. It'd be this bike, because I actually can ride it all year round. I can go anywhere I want to. I could ride in the winter time. Just change the tires. Let me show you what this thing can do in dynamic pro mode. It's just next level. All right, we're 3rd gear. Oh, wait, is that the right mode? Maybe it's not dynamic pro mode. What mode am I thinking of? No, that's the mode. Now, I'm very aware that these motorcycles could be intimidating. They're big, they're heavy, but once you learn how to properly ride them, they start getting really small, and they're not as big and they're not as heavy, and they just really seem to do what it's made to do extremely well. And I actually feel comfortable doing things I never thought I'd feel comfortable doing on a motorcycle like this. I've also dropped this bike about a half dozen times since I got it, and I just got it. There we go. Saved it. Amazing. Alright guys, that wraps up the test drive. We'll see you guys next time. Remember, it's not what you're riding, but where you're going.